Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. So today we're going to be covering postgraduate study in the US, and we'll kind of go through the whole process and what you can expect if you're intending to apply to a US university for your postgraduate degree. So my name is Abby, and I am an Education USA advisor. And I'm joined today by my colleague Rowena.
Hi everyone, I'm also an Education USA advisor at Fulbright alongside Abby. Studying in the US totally changed my life, and we're really excited to share a bit more about how you might go about that process with you today.
Great. All right, so we'll get started. So just a little bit at first about Education USA services at Fulbright. So we offer free, unbiased free, unbiased advice for students who want to apply and study in the US. And we're part of a network of over 400 advising centers in more than 170 countries. And we really want to help you fulfill your dream of going to the US for your studies. Our center is based at the US-UK Fulbright Commission in London, and the Commission and EducationUSA are paired up to help people explore education in the US. And at graduate level, the Fulbright Commission will also provide awards to graduate students to go to the US. So we're very excited to help you in any way that we can with your goals of US study. Next, please. Okay. So the first question we want to address is why study in the US for your postgraduate degree at all? I'm sure you all have your own individual reasons for wanting to do so, but we have some common thoughts on why the US might be a great place to pursue your postgraduate degree over pursuing it in the UK. So the US offers a wide range of choices of study. So there are over 1,700 universities that offer postgraduate degrees in the US. And this compares to only about 120 in the UK. So just from those numbers alone, you can see that there's a lot of variety in institutions and also amongst the different academic departments within each of those institutions. Another big reason that you might be considering this is to internationalize your CV. Employers cite cross-cultural experience as a really attractive quality that they would like in their employees. So it's helpful to have diverse experiences and to demonstrate independence, which is necessary for studying abroad. Another reason might be global networking. US universities give you an unparalleled opportunity to create global networks, not only with American faculty and institution, but with diverse colleagues that make up many American universities. Practical experience, a lot of the opportunities available for postgraduate study in the US are hands-on research, internships, teaching opportunities, all that kind of stuff. So it's a really great way to gain some practical experience alongside studies. Generally, studying in a different country will expand your horizons. It expands your worldview, and it may expand the opportunities available to you in the future as well. And finally, funding opportunities, which might sound surprising to you, but a final top reason to study in the US is honestly funding opportunities. There's a lot of funding schemes and scholarships available at the postgraduate level, and we'll talk about those a little bit later to give you an idea of what might actually be out there. Next. So what are some of the main differences between postgraduate study in the US versus in the UK? So a few of the key differences, one of the main ones is duration. So typically in the US, programs are longer. So like a 2-year master's is pretty much the norm. That's very common for master's degrees in the US, compared to the typical 1 year in the UK. There are still one-year programs out there available in the US, but it's not quite as common as 2 years. And then for PhDs, they're typically 4 to 6 years. And this may be less or more depending on the program and department and the degree you're getting. Also, there's an integrated master's and PhD in the first year or two of the coursework. So those who have masters can use this time to sharpen skills and gain more experience teaching or doing research as an assistant. Typically in the UK, a master's is a mandatory component, or typically just in general, a master's in the US is a mandatory component of the degree that you're getting. There are no pure research degrees, so programs include coursework on a postgraduate level. While there might be research aspects, they will all include coursework. There's also no set fees or standard application deadlines in the US for universities. So these two things can vary greatly by university and department within the university. That's something that you want to keep an eye out when you're researching universities is the fees that they charge and the deadlines, because they will be different for each institution. And postgraduate programs are organized by department, not by the supervisor. So you do not need to know your supervisor beforehand, especially since some programs are more interdisciplinary. And that means that you may have multiple supervisors or even a committee of supervisors. And you do not need to have an in-depth research proposal. They expect you to figure this out throughout the program. And then one of the biggest differences, and this is kind of applied to the whole higher education system in the US versus the UK, but two rather popular areas of study are only at the postgraduate level, and that is law and medicine. All right, so next. So to give you an idea of what your timeline should and probably will look like if you are considering applying to a postgraduate degree in the US. So we recommend beginning to research programs about 12 to 18 months before you enroll. And then it's best we recommend finalize a selection of about 3 to 6 universities where you'll be applying, and you'll be applying around 10 to 12 months before you plan to enroll. And around the same time, you want to take any required admissions exams and begin your applications. So we'll talk a little bit about your applications and admissions exams in this webinar, but just to give you an idea of when that should fall in your calendar as you're working on applying to postgraduate programs. And then about 8 to 10 months before you enroll, you will put together an application and submit it according to the deadlines that the university set for themselves. And then around 4 to 7 months beforehand, in the spring before you enroll, you can expect to hear back from the universities you applied to with their admissions decisions. And then based off of where you are accepted, you will then notify universities of your decision and apply for a visa about 1 to 3 months before enrollment. There's lots of resources on our website to help with your pre-departure, including travel advice, living arrangements, campus life, etc. And something to keep in mind is that the start dates for most of these programs in the US are slightly earlier than the UK, and they typically start around mid-August to early September. All right, so now I'm going to pass it over to Rowena, who's going to discuss a little bit about choosing a program and the all-important funding question.
Thanks so much, Abby. Okay, so one of the things to be aware of is that in the United States, there's over 1,700 institutions offering postgraduate programs, what the US will call graduate programs. So there's loads of options, and each institution, and within that, each department offering these graduate programs will be really different. Each university, each program will have its own personality, its own vibe going on. So how do you go about narrowing down where you might actually end up applying? With so many universities, how do you make sense of it all? Here's where we're here to help. So something we talk about a lot over here at Fulbright is this idea around fit. And what this means is you want to find a program that is going to be a really good fit for what you're trying to achieve with your academic and your personal interests, but also is going to that you're going to be able to contribute and be a good fit in that program. So you're looking for programs that will be a good fit for you. And each university and each program within each university will be different. So just a certain university might have some programs that are a good fit for you and some programs that are not a good fit for you. It will depend on what you're looking to get out of it along the way. So the first step in the choosing process is you want to think about what factors would be important to you in terms of the sense of fit. And you want to make a list of what really does matter to you. So you might start to think about, the type of degree you're looking for. Is it that you're looking for a PhD? Maybe you're looking for an MBA. Maybe it's a master's in public policy. Whatever it happens to be, you might start with that as a factor. You might be thinking about universities that have amazing research in the particular programs that you're looking at. Or you might be starting to think about other factors that are important to you. Now, I would just say at this stage, you want to not just start looking at universities that you've heard of straight away, maybe ones you've seen in movies or TV or in the news, just because not with 1,700 universities offering graduate degrees in the US, most of those universities we've not heard of here in the UK. So you might miss out on some amazing programs that could be a great fit for you if you just start with perhaps what you've heard of so far. Okay, so when I was saying about those factors, things you might want to think about, you might want to have a think about the type of institution you want to attend. Do you want to be in a really big university with thousands upon thousands upon thousands of students, loads of different departments, loads of different programs, a really big institution? Maybe there are, 80, 90,000 graduate and undergraduate students rolling around. Or maybe you actually want to be in a really small institution where you're going to be part of a trusted faculty and forming really close relationships with leading professors in their field. Perhaps you want to be thinking about whether you're looking at a private university or a public university. And both of these factors can change quite a lot the personality of a university and the thing that is going on. Then you also want to be having to think about program type. So this at the postgraduate level is arguably more important than the type of institution itself, because an individual department and a program within that department will be have a much bigger bearing on your overall experience than the university as a whole. So you want to have a think about your career goals, your qualifications, any concentrations that you might be interested in. Do you want to be in a program with funded intern opportunities? So you want to have a think about all of that kind of piece. Perhaps you want to be looking for a particular program where you might get some experience with grant writing. Have a think about what you want from your program experience and which programs may offer you the type of thing that you're looking for. Then you want to have a think about the academic department as a whole. And choosing the right academic department is almost as important as choosing the right university at postgraduate level, because it's going to influence so much of your experience. So the thing you want to remember is that at postgraduate level, at graduate level at a US university, the academic department generally handles admissions, it designs the course structure for students, it monitors the students' progression through the program, and is generally the community in which your academic experience fits into. So it's essential to research and find the right academic home for you. Departments can really drastically differ at each university. So even within one university, different departments may feel quite different. So it can differ in terms of the areas of faculty expertise. You might find that there are particular departments which are literally the world leaders in a particular subject or research area. You might also be looking at what elective courses that you can do as part of the graduate degree you're looking at, or perhaps particular concentrations to kind of specialize the program further. You might be looking at whether a program is very tightly focused on a particular research area, or are they more interdisciplinary? Again, different departments, different programs will have a different spin on this. You might be thinking about the size and the atmosphere, a collaborative environment versus quite a competitive environment where people are fighting for research funding. Again, it can differ. There's no right or wrong on this one. It's what you're looking for. And then you might be thinking about the opportunities for teaching, for research, whether there's opportunities to attend conferences, gain internships, etc. It depends on exactly the type of program you're looking for, but you want to be considering these kind of academic options inside of your decision making. Then you also might want to be thinking about broader factors. So you might be thinking about the location of a particular university. We all know that the US is a massive country, but it always slightly blows my mind that the US spans 6 different time zones. And so you've got a full range of opportunities in what is a really big country. So you might be thinking about whether you want to be in an urban environment or a college town environment or a more rural environment. You might be thinking about climate. If you don't like the snow and the cold, then probably New England or kind of the north of the United States might not be such a good fit for you. You might be thinking about access to transportation. In some parts of the United States, public transport is very much a thing. And in other parts of the US, it's really not a thing. And that could have quite a big bearing on your overall experience. And then you could be thinking about centers of excellence in a particular field. So, for example, you might be looking at universities in Washington, D.C., if you're looking at politics, or perhaps New York City, if you were thinking about finance. There's lots of areas of excellence across the United States, but there are some particular fields where you may find the alignment between what's going on in the locality and the particular program you're studying as being especially helpful. And then you also might want to be thinking about any extracurricular opportunities. US universities are known for their go big or go home, strong campus life, campus community, and strong student life. And as a graduate student, there is an opportunity for you to be involved in that same community. So you might be looking also about wider extracurricular factors that you might want to take into account as well. Then other things you might want to think about is finances. We're going to talk more about funding later in the webinar, but if funding is important to you, then this definitely needs to be something that you're thinking about in your choosing process right from the beginning. Often funding, especially from universities, is awarded and applied for alongside the application process. So you don't want to start thinking about it after you've applied and been accepted, because at that point it may be far too late. Perhaps the funding opportunities will have already disappeared, and we don't want you to be disappointed at that point. You want to make sure that you're following the money that's available. So if you need funding to pursue postgraduate study in the US, do make sure you're looking out for those opportunities from the start. Okay, so with that all in mind, you've thought about the factors that are important to you. Perhaps you've made a list that you can start to measure different choices against. You've thought about the kinds of experiences that you might be interested in. Now you want to go about starting to take that 1,700 universities and start to narrow down your options to find programs that you're looking to apply to. That's the goal here, is to find programs that would be a great fit for you. So our website's got a page called Choosing a University, which includes a whole load of links to really helpful search engines that help you find graduate programs in the US. And some of the names of these are like Peterson's and gradschools.com. Again, our website has loads of links out. You can just go click on them. So please do go check that out. And what you can start to do is start to narrow your options down by using some of these tools that we're going to look at in a minute. You can also start to help build out your research by having a think about other tools and sources of information that might be available to you. So maybe you've got some previous professors from perhaps an earlier master's or from university, and you could contact those previous professors and see if they've got any advice or opinions on schools that might be a really good fit for you. Often people who are experts in their field know where the other experts are. So if you've had a professor who's been really good on their particular field, they may well be able to make suggestions for you of professors at US universities. Or they may have research links or otherwise that mean that they can even get you a personal introduction, which might be great as well. So you can start to look around, and if you're in the workplace and you're looking at something like an MBA, again, professionals in the workplace, perhaps colleagues, perhaps directors of HR, perhaps your boss, people like that, leaders in your company may be able to make some suggestions of schools as well. So thinking about who is it around me who might have expertise in helping me figure out this landscape and even make personal connections along the way. You might also be thinking about the research that you've done, either at an undergraduate level or at a graduate level, if you've done a master's or something like that before, or perhaps in the workplace. You may well have a sense of researchers, scholars that you've perhaps previously read, or you've used the work of, or you've seen them cited a lot. Maybe there are people that you could identify who do the kind of research that you'd like to be doing. Where are they and what are they teaching? What are their colleagues working on? You could be looking around to help discover centres of excellence for particular fields that you're interested in, or or even emerging fields that are very new on the scene. Again, there's opportunities to kind of jump in and get involved on that. So you want to be thinking about starting to build out your list of universities that you might be looking at, or programs that you're looking at, by perhaps pulling on the research that you have access to along the way. Okay, so I talked about Peterson. So this is an example of Peterson's search engine, which is linked to from our website. And it's particularly helpful to decide on and rank what factors are important to you when you're choosing a university. So in this example I've got here, I'm going to use Peterson's to have a look up for graduate level schools and programs in a particular field. And for this particular example, I'm going to be looking up programs in anthropology. So I pop onto Peterson's, I type in anthropology and hit search. And this is the kind of response that you get. So you can see here that there is a huge number of anthropology programs that are listed. There is around 214 graduate schools offering some kind of program in anthropology listed on Peterson's websites. So you can see the different departments or programs in anthropology. And what's great about these results is you might be seeing universities perhaps you've heard of, somewhere like University of California, Santa Cruz, or you could be looking at American University, but you might be discovering universities perhaps you've not heard of before. This could be a great springboard for research into different programs. And what I particularly like about Peterson's is you can see down the left there are ways to start filtering out different results. So, for example, if you were looking for universities that were based in a suburban or a rural or a small town, you could click those boxes and then filter out programs that were in urban centres that you weren't so interested in. Or if you're looking for, a PhD, you might be filtering by doctoral programs as opposed to master's programs. So there's ways that you can use this to start to adjust and streamline your list. So tools like this can be really helpful. And like I say, we've linked to lots of them from our website. And what you'd want to be doing is heading into each result. And from there, you'll see information about the university that you're looking at and about that particular program. And they'll have a link through to the program's website. So the program's website can be really helpful to learn more about that particular program. So you want to start thinking about building out a list of universities. If it were me, I would be keeping a spreadsheet just to keep myself organized, perhaps the name of the university and the program that you're looking at, and then starting to keep records of things like important dates coming up, anything about, perhaps the URL that's talking about the application process, any information about funding, anything that I'm noting that makes the school stand out to me and feel like it might be a good fit for me. So I'd start to be organizing my research that way. You want to be researching your universities in depth. there's no good in just kind of going, oh, well, this particular university over here, I've heard of it. It's got a program in finance. Let's go. I'm just going to apply for it. US universities, and particularly graduate level programs, expect you to have done your research, to have thought about why the program is a good fit for you and what you will be offering to that university. So making sure that you've done your research, having gone into the program web pages, having learned more about the university itself is really important. And essentially what you're looking to do is build out a long list, which then you create into a short list of around 3 to 6 institutions where you're actually going to submit an application. So to get down to that kind of smaller number of universities that you're actually applying to, a number of programs that you're applying to, you want to spend time on the university website. And on each university website and each program website, you can find more information about the university's faculty in that particular department. Sometimes you can even see their faculty CVs, their research interests, and perhaps a list of their publications. So you can learn a whole lot about people who will be potentially colleagues of yours, and to learn more about the kinds of people who end up working there as part of that university community. And the other thing is you might find on a program's website is specific contact information for a specific professor to reach out to. So it might be that you're able to have a conversation and a dialogue with that professor. It might mean that you can have a look around and see if they're working on things that are interesting to you. It's about building out a sense of the community that you would be looking to join. You also might find details about how to reach out to current graduate students in that program or at that university. And they can provide a really valuable insight into their experience at a particular university as a graduate student. You can learn a lot more about how they feel about their experience and what they are getting out of the program. You might even find that some universities have opportunities where you can book in for a Zoom call with a current student, or even a kind of drop-in Zoom drop-in session as well. So again, talking to current graduate students on the programs that you're potentially looking at is a really great way to find out what projects they're working on, how close is the relationship between the professors and the graduate students, how close are they with their supervisors, what's the campus culture like, or how it is teaching the undergraduate students at that university, all of those kind of questions. And it's also an opportunity to ask more broad questions about what the local area is like, how to find an apartment, what the cost of living is like, and all of these good stuff as well. And then what you'll find on each department website is there will be people that you can reach out to at the department. And you'll find that they've got their email address and contact details there. So they're the people that you can reach out to if you've got questions or you want to be put in touch with a current student or anything like that. They're great resources to help learn more about a program. And you'll find that often big programs might be running their own information sessions where you can join online to learn more about what it might be like to be a student in that department. Okay, so you've started to hone down to perhaps programs that you're particularly interested in. You're doing your research, you're digging through. And next, we just wanted to talk a little bit about funding your studies. So once you've narrowed down that option, let's talk about funding. Funding is one of the top things that we get asked about at Fulbright as Education USA advisors. And it's something that we know that there's a lot of questions about, and it's kind of grappling with how you face this in a different university system. It does work differently in the United States. What I will just say is that there is a slight misconception that the US is always going to be more expensive than perhaps pursuing graduate study in the UK. It's a misconception because there is some good news here. There is some significant funding available for graduate level study, and particularly if you're willing to be flexible and to go into the process with an open mind. So how do you go about thinking about that funding? Let's find out. Okay, so thing to say is there's a few sources of money to think about. And it's just worth being aware that Americans approach the idea of higher education funding quite differently than if you've, say, grown up here in the UK or gone to university here in the UK. There is a different mentality around the way that people pay for education. So the first source of funding to have a think about, and the first source of funding a university will be thinking about, is what personal or family funds you might have available to you. For some people, they might have all the funding available to pursue, say, an MBA or a PhD, and that can all come from personal funding. Amazing, that opens up lots of opportunities for that person. Or it might be that there's actually, less money available. Might need to look at other sources of funding as well, but anything you can put aside, if you're working at the moment, putting aside anything towards the costs of studying will serve you well in this space. And it's a very, very American perspective. There is an idea that the very best way that perhaps you could spend money is on education to better oneself. So thinking about what resources are available and what you can contribute to this process is really important. The next source of funding that I want to just cover off is US universities. And in terms of amounts, this is often one of the areas that I see British students being particularly successful at gaining funding for graduate study in the US. It's a great set of funding because it doesn't need to be paid back. So there's two common types of university-based funding. The first is called fellowships, which are essentially outright grants to allow a recipient to focus on their studies and their research. So a fellowship is a bit like a scholarship. It's free gift money is given to somebody in order to enable their studies. So that's what if you're seeing the word fellowship, it means a scholarship of a varying amount towards the cost of the studies there. And then you might also be seeing a reference to assistantships. So assistantships are a little bit different. They are a form of funding from universities, but assistantships is a form of money offered in return for services that a student provides to the department. So this could be teaching an undergraduate section. It could be marking papers for a professor. It could be taking part in research under the guidance of a professor. Maybe it's supervising an undergraduate lab. Maybe it's working in a campus office to contribute to the wider university beyond perhaps your particular program. And often what you'll find is that an assistantship will again have varying amounts, but it often comes with it perhaps some form of fee waiver, some or all or part of the fees. And there may be things like a health insurance or even a stipend that comes as part of an assistantship. And assistantships are renewable year to year. So as long as you hold up a certain academic standard, hopefully you would be having that for the years that you will be in your degree. So the terms of assistantships will vary dramatically between universities and departments. And it will depend on the available grants, the field, what needs a particular department has, all of that good stuff. So you want to be looking into the terms, the conditions of an assistantship if you're considering one. I would just say that it's always important to be asking a department or a program about fellowships and assistantships when you're looking at applying. You want to make sure that you're aware of any funding if that's something you need. You want to make sure that the funding is available. And I would just flag here that more funding is generally available for PhDs and perhaps students in a research-focused master's than perhaps a professional degree than for professional degree students. So for example, somebody looking at a research PhD may find that there's more funding available than perhaps somebody who is looking to further their career with an MBA program, for example, or an LLM program. These are seen as more professional programs where somebody is investing in themselves in order to increase their salary fairly dramatically afterwards. You'll also find that often there might be more funding available in the sciences. rather than perhaps programs in the humanities. It's not to say it doesn't happen, but just sometimes that can be a quirk of the kind of grant making process in the US. And you want to make sure that when you're looking at US university program websites, you're really exploring the different options available. So you want to be having a look at the program page itself. Is there any information on there about assistantships, fellowships? Then you want to zoom up to the department level where there might be several programs underneath that department. Maybe you might find that there are assistantships or fellowships at that department level that are open to students of any program that is in that department. And then you might even want to zoom up one level further and look at the graduate school office. Maybe they have assistantships or fellowships available. And again, that's open to any graduate student in any department across the university. So you just want to make sure that you're looking around, and then also make sure you're looking at the financial aid office. Sometimes universities have their financial aid office set up for graduate students. So understanding, is there funding available there? You just might need to make sure that you've had a look around all the different options in order to assess the different options available to you. Okay, and then another area of funding that you can have a look at is something called external funding bodies. So these can be considered like niche scholarships, and they are given by institutions that are separate to a university. It could be companies, charities, foundations. One example, which we'll talk about later, of an external funding body is in fact the US-UK Fulbright Commission. And then you can learn a bit more later on in this webinar about how these external funding bodies work and what opportunities might open up because of them. And then finally, the last source of funding you could think about is loans. So what I'd just say about loans is, unfortunately, the UK postgraduate loan doesn't go with you to the United States. You can't use it at a US university. So what you would be thinking about if you are looking at loans is looking at some form of perhaps private loans or commercial loans in order to go and study in the US. What I would say here is most US lenders will expect someone taking out a graduate student loan to have, if they're not a US citizen, to have a US citizen who's willing to be a co-signer on that loan, willing to take on the responsibility of paying back that loan on your behalf, should you not be able to make those payments. What I would just therefore say, and so for some people that's just not an option as well. What I would just say is, if you are looking at loans, I'd first of all make sure you understand what you're getting into. Make sure you understand the terms, the conditions, the interest rate, when it might need to be paid back, and how it works. And just remember that the US works loans a bit differently to how we think about, for example, the undergraduate student loan or the UK postgraduate loan here in the UK. You also then want to start just thinking around, the question I've got is a loan the right way forward? Have you explored all the other funding options? And have you been open-minded to perhaps other programs which might be a better fit because they have better funding available to you if you're having to look at loans? The other thing about external funding bodies and US universities funding is it generally doesn't need to be paid back. So that can be a really beneficial reason to spend the time and energy looking at those different forms of funding. Okay, so a couple of thoughts on funding strategy. If funding is something that you need, a strategy here to have a think about is utilizing one or two of these different factors. So you want to be thinking about how to maximize the funding that you might be available for, and how to manage costs of studying at university. So you might want to have a think about reducing the cost of living. So for example, going to a graduate program in the middle of Manhattan is going to be far more expensive because of the cost of living than perhaps a graduate program at somewhere like, I don't know, Michigan State University, which is a top research university in the state of Michigan, which has coincidentally one of the lowest costs of living. Just like if you decide to do a program in the middle of central London, that's going to cost you more in terms of rent and food and all that kind of stuff than perhaps doing a program at the University of Lancaster. You'll find that living in urban areas tends to be more expensive than perhaps living in a more rural or suburban area. So something to have a think about there. You may wish to balance those costs of living against the tuition costs and having a think about how you might manage tuition costs. So what you'll find is that in the US, public universities are state funded. So they're funded by the citizens of a state in order to provide great education to citizens of that state. And they generally tend to have lower tuition costs than private universities who rely on both their grant funding and then student tuition fees to make their income. So you might find that looking at state universities or public universities gives you an option to manage the cost of tuition. On the other hand, the other thing you might want to be thinking about is the funding available. So you might be thinking about what universities have, what funding is available. So you might want to be thinking about, can you be strategic with the types of funding that you're looking for? So you might find that you have a particular interest or area that is cross-disciplinary, and you're able to leverage funding from two different areas. You might not be able to use all these strategies all in one go. So you might find that, for example, a lower tuition university has less university funding that you can leverage, or you might find that a lower cost of living university might have higher tuition, for example, but you might be able to balance these different factors together against each other to come up with a good fit funding for you. The key thing here is doing your research and making sure that you're entering this game early, because it does change the process quite a lot. As you think about and weigh these up, will help and shape and change the programs that you're looking to apply to. Okay, so I just wanted to give you an example here of a funding strategy. And it could be that one thing you could do is have a look at universities in a certain proximity or in a certain locale, and see if there is a way to perhaps compare costs or kind of see how things fit together. So I picked these two universities in Boston, in Massachusetts. So Boston University is a private university, and its cost of attendance for a degree in the Department of Education and Human Development is well over $85,000 a year. And that includes your tuition, room, board, and fees, as well as your tuition costs. $85,000 a year. It's a 2-year program. So you're easily looking at $160,000 plus if you're paying for the whole thing. Now, you could compare this to the University of Massachusetts, which is a state university, University of Massachusetts, Boston, where you might then find that tuition and off-campus housing actually comes to about $40,000 per year. So there's kind of a difference of $45,000 between these two examples for very similar programs. Both are in the same city, but what you'll see is that there's a huge variety in cost to attend, and how they are structuring their costs. So they're very close to each other, these two universities, in terms of distance, but it's just something to be thinking about. And what you might find interesting is Boston University and the University of Massachusetts Boston are both great research universities. And what they have done is agreed that students can cross-register to take classes in each other's university. So you could be a University of Massachusetts student paying far less for your program and be sat in a Boston University class on a particular topic. So it's just something to bear in mind, that you want to be looking around at the opportunities and keep open-minded about how it works. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about how some of the funding works and look at some particular examples on how to identify funding opportunities. So for university funding, the best resource that you're going to be looking at is the university's website. Make sure you're looking at the department, the graduate school, and the financial aid pages for each program that you're looking at. Check them all just in case a funding opportunity is listed on one page but not the others. You want to start checking at what they're saying. How much funding do they have available? Universities try to give you an accurate but conservative measure of how much funding they might be able to offer. This information isn't available online. It might suggest that they can't offer a lot of financial support, but it's always worth just getting in touch with the university just in case. Just bear in mind it's often an indicator that there isn't much funding around. You might want to have a think about whether you would actually be a competitive applicant for funding at that particular institution. If you're applying to an institution which perhaps has the top research department in your particular field, you know that there will be thousands of people also applying for the same place on a program. Do have a think about what you can offer and how you're going to demonstrate that you're a competitive applicant. Funding tends to go to the top applicants. One of the things you can do is adjust the department or the program you're looking at. Maybe it's a program that isn't quite as popular with British students or isn't quite as in a big urban area. Maybe that will help you stand out and attract that funding. You might also want to ask current students how competitive funding really is, what their assistantship involves, what the work-life balance is like. Really get the inside scoop. And then you also want to be asking the program administrators how many assistantships are available. Are they full assistantships? Do they cover the whole cost of tuition? Are they partial? Maybe they only cover part of it. If possible, you want to find out what basis they're awarded on. Is an admissions exam factored into this, or is it more on the basis of your other academics or your prior experiences? You want to make sure that you find out if there are any extra requirements that you need to fulfill to be considered for an assistantship. You might be automatically considered, but in some cases, applicants may need to submit an additional essay or resume, what we would call a CV. So it's just worth thinking about the different aspects of university funding and how you might go about it, and being realistic and strategic and open-minded with the funding opportunities that you're seeking out. Ways to position yourself to be a top applicant in their admissions pool. Okay, let's have a little look at an example of a university website where you might be able to find funding information. So this is the website of the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, which is a top public university in North Carolina. It's one of the oldest universities in the United States, and this is the Department of Political Science. So this is a page on this department's website, helpfully titled Fellowships and Assistantships. So we've highlighted some of the key points in their section on fellowships and assistantships and how to identify if funding is available. So what I would just say is here, universities that are generous with funding normally make it quite obvious on their websites. In this particular Department of Political Science, they note that most students in their department are supported by fellowships and assistantships. So you can see we put that in a red box at the top there. That suggests there's lots of funding available for students that make it onto this competitive program. And then you'll see it gives a little bit more information about the duties that are typically asked of students doing an assistantship. So you can see that those duties are 10 to 15 hours a week and list the type of duties that you might expect if you're on an assistantship here. It mentions eligibility for a variety of fellowships, and it also notes that Chapel Hill has a really low cost of living. So you've got some indicators here of that funding strategy back to cost of living, and then thinking about university funding that might be available. So you can see that this can be a page like this can be incredibly helpful. And you can even see that they've got suggestions of people that you could be contacting for more information. Okay, we talked about external funding. I'm just going to cover that off a little bit more. So these are some examples of scholarships from some of the many external funding bodies that offer funding to students from the UK looking to go and study at US universities. So these are non-university scholarships and can be partial funding or full funding. So there's loads of different resources for exploring external funding scholarships. So first thing you want to be looking at is online scholarship searches. So you can see a list of those on our website under the postgraduate guide to finding a university. So you can use these searches to help you narrow down from thousands of scholarships available based on various factors to find a smaller, more manageable list that may be a good fit for you. So you want to have a think about eligibility, you want to find out more about the information about the process, and you want to make sure that you're looking carefully at the funding body's website for information about how to go about applying, how to go about deadlines, and so on. I'll give you an example. Somebody who I did my undergraduate degree with ended up applying for graduate programs in the US based around American studies. And she actually won a scholarship from BUNAC that helped towards the cost of her degree. She ended up doing a master's in political science at the University of Wyoming, partly because they offered her a really generous assistantship that meant that not only was her tuition all covered, but she also had a living stipend for helping professors with undergraduate classes on top of the scholarship that she received from BUNAC. So there are options and scholarships out there and available to UK students as well. I'm now going to hand over to Abby, who's going to share a bit of information about one of those in particular.
So, as you probably know by now, we are Education USA, but we also work out of the US-UK Fulbright Commission. So, one of the excellent external funding opportunities that is available to you is a Fulbright Award. So this is for a master's degree, a PhD, or a bit more specifically, a visiting student research, which usually you wouldn't end up getting a degree for. But just to keep in mind the deadlines, this can be one of the most confusing aspects of the Fulbright Award. So the application cycle for starting this year has already closed. The application cycle for starting next year, 2026, has already closed. So the next chance you have to apply is when the application opens in early February, and it will close in early May of 2026. And you're not applying for enrollment starting in the autumn of 2026. You would then be applying for 2027. So keep that in mind. It's very far in advance. So that's something that you definitely want to have in the back of your mind. All of the details about the Fulbright Award, such as eligibility requirements or the deadlines and more details, are available on our website. And you can also email this email address, programs@fulbright.org.uk, if you have any specific questions. But generally speaking, the number of awards fluctuates each year, and we have a variety of awards available. Some are for covering your costs for the first year of your postgraduate degree. Some are completely fully funded for all the years. And if you are really flexible about where you want to study, a great option offered through the Fulbright Award is called the IIE placement model. And those are our partners in the United States. And with them, you apply, you can list your preferences of university, but they will work with you then to tailor your application to what they, based on their expertise, which is very vast, they will help you apply to certain universities and programs based on your preferences, yes, but also what you want to study and where they think that you have an excellent chance of standing out. All right, and I'll let Rowena finish off the last of our information about funding, and then we'll move on to applications.
Perfect. Thank you so much. One thing that always surprises me about the Fulbright Awards is that sense of community, of being an ambassador for your country, both in the United States and then when you return home. So it's always worth having a look at what is motivating the external funding body. Different funding bodies will have different expectations of students. So at Fulbright, that kind of ambassadorial exchange of culture between the US and the UK, an exchange of research is really important. So that shapes and changes both what the scholarship is looking for, but also the kind of expectations of people who win that scholarship. So worth having a think about that as you go forward as well. Okay, just to finish off our funding, here are our funding top tips. So make sure that you are thinking about funding early on. There is nothing worse than having a call from somebody who explains that they've got into this amazing graduate program. They're so proud of themselves, but it's April and they're due to start in August, and they suddenly realize that they have a big old gap in the funding. Make sure that you're looking for programs that you're looking early, and that is a consideration up at the front of your journey of researching US universities, so that you can be identifying schools that are going to have the money in order to be able to afford you. The next thing I want to say is it is going to take some time and effort. Sometimes people say to me, Rowena, can you just give me a spreadsheet of schools that have funding? And the answer is I can't, just because that doesn't exist. To seek out funding is going to take extra time and effort on top of researching universities that will be a good fit for you, programs that will be a good fit for you. But it can really be worth that extra time and effort. So really seeking out and looking for and making sure that you've explored those different funding options, and it does take time. The next thing I want to say, and I've bolded it because it's that important, is you want to be flexible in choosing universities. My friend that I mentioned earlier, who did her graduate degree in the US at the University of Wyoming, lots of people say, Wyoming, I've never been there before. She actually had 2 offers from 2 different programs on the table, and she chose University of Wyoming because they offered the best funding. So the more flexible that you can be when you're choosing and looking at different programs, the more opportunity that you might have to seek out funding. If you're one of the many people from the UK who decide to apply to a school like, I don't know, Columbia, know that you're going to be in a long line with lots of other people maybe offering similar things to that university community. Whereas if you're willing to be a bit more open-minded and perhaps a bit more open-minded in your choices, you may find that you stand out far more in other admissions pools. Okay, so you also want to be thinking about where you're going to be a top student. Again, universities that receive thousands of applications for their graduate programs are likely to be highly competitive when it comes to funding. And many amazing students may not even get a look in on that front. So just being thoughtful when you're approaching that can be really important. You want to be having a think about where you can find that information on finding university funding. Make sure that you're exploring that university website along the way. You want to be thinking about minimizing your upfront costs. So just thinking about how can you make sure that your costs of housing are kept down, or do you need a car in the United States? It depends where you're going. So you want to make sure that you're thinking carefully about how you can minimize those costs of attending school in the US. And then you also want to think about financial assistance in country. I get often asked, hey, Rowena, can't I just get a job in the US that will, in a particular field, that will pay off my costs of tuition? And the answer is not really. When you go to get a visa to study in the United States, assuming that you're a non-US citizen, when you go to get that visa, you need to be able to show that you have funding there in place in the form of personal funds or in the form of an assistantship or fellowship that is going to cover and make it viable for you to complete that degree. If you can't show that at the point where you are going for your student visa, you will find that you will not be able to get a visa for that particular program. So you want to make sure that you have your funding in place. What I would just say is that on a US student visa, there are some opportunities to do a kind of a campus job, essentially, which may help with some of those kind of personal expenses, right? So relatively small amounts that help you kind of survive day to day. You'll also want to be thinking, you know, some of those assistantships or fellowships which might have offer a stipend, so that's something to have a think about as well. So just being kind of aware of the funding landscape is really important. I'm going to hand back to Abby in just 1 second, but I do just want to flag, we've covered a lot of ground in what we've talked about so far in terms of choosing universities and funding US universities. So if you do have any questions, we're going to come to questions at the end of the webinar, but please feel free to use the Q&A box to ask questions, and we will cycle through those at the end of the webinar. And we're happy to answer questions on anything we've covered or anything else you want to ask us along the way as well. Over to you, Abby.
All right, so now you've heard all about how you can go about your research and what kind of things to consider when you're deciding where to apply, but now we're going to talk about exactly how you apply. So, of course, as Rowena mentioned, you definitely want to consider your fit and funding first. And again, to reiterate, doing that in-depth research in your choosing process is so important and will impact your application process, because as you get familiar with the types of programs that the universities offer, and you can show that you have done your research, that helps you make a more competitive application. And the more competitive your application is, then the better chances the better chances you have at securing funding as well. So spend that time researching because it will probably benefit you in the long run. So now we're going to talk about the main components of completing an application. So next, please. So what are they looking for? As in, what are these US universities looking for when they're deciding who to admit for their postgraduate programs? The details, of course, vary based on the program. So an MBA application will look very different to a Master's of Molecular Physics application. So make sure you know what kind of program you're applying for and tailor your application suitably. So US universities look for academic achievement measured by your undergraduate, or if applicable, if you're applying for another postgraduate, your postgraduate degree results, and then also admissions test scores, which we'll come to in a little bit. So most want to see at least a 2.2 on a bachelor's degree. And if you're unsure about your qualifications, you can always contact the individual departments or programs about whether your qualifications are sufficient to be considered for admissions. And if you're really unsure, that's probably the best way to go so that you don't waste your time putting together an application for somewhere that your qualifications won't even work for. And most universities won't have strict entry requirements, but they should be able to give you an approximate idea of whether your academic profile is roughly in line with their usual admitted student. So again, as Rowena mentioned, academic fit is really important. So you want to think about the reasons for pursuing a postgraduate degree at their institution, that institution specifically, and how it helps towards your goals. Think about the relevant work experience and coursework, and also your extracurricular involvement. So US universities want to see a pattern of relevant work and study and experience, laying a strong academic and practical foundation for your studies, plus as well as your ability and interest in being involved both inside and outside of the classroom. So with undergraduate applications, we talk about a holistic approach that US universities take. It's a little different for postgraduate applications, but ultimately they still want to see who you are as well as your academic achievements and desires and goals. So they may also want to know why you want to study in the US specifically. If you are applying for a Fulbright award, for example, that's absolutely a part of the application. Why should you be permitted to study in the US when you could do maybe a similar degree elsewhere, even in the UK. So definitely think about why the US, and especially when you're applying to individual universities, why that university? Why is that the best place for you and your academic goals? All right, next. So application components. There is no standard process for applications, and it will vary by university. And again, each university will set its own deadlines and application requirements. So remember, there's always a difference depending. But most applications will follow a similar format in the sense that you'll be able to reuse or adapt the materials that you prepare for each. So most will ask for and include an application form with basic information, admissions test scores, if necessary, and those will be sent to the university by the organization that administered the test. A transcript or a list of your academic marks. And you can usually ask your department university registrar's office for a transcript of undergraduate or master's documentation of your grades. A personal statement describing your academic interests, your professional and personal goals, any relevant experience you have for that particular program. And it's really an opportunity for you to put forth any personal history and context and ultimately sell yourself to the program. And then most will also require 2 to 3 letters of recommendation. And the university may provide some loose guidelines for selecting referees. For example, one letter has to be from an academic reference. And so make sure you're choosing people who know you well, preferably both in and out of the classroom, so that they can best speak to who you are as a person and as a student. So they'll often ask for a CV, or in American parlance, so we would call it a resume, which lists your professional and extracurricular accomplishments and basically what you've been doing, whether you've been working and you had a break between your undergraduate and now you're applying for postgraduate, or if you're coming straight from undergraduate, you'll still want to be able to provide a resume or a CV. Some require an interview. So for example, for an MBA, this can be common, and occasionally for research degrees too, but it really depends on your program. And then, of course, if you're in the arts, it's possible that you'll need to prepare an audition. So art students may also need to submit a portfolio, while on the other side, students applying for research-focused degrees may be asked to submit a writing sample. So again, that's how it really depends on what kind of discipline you're applying for. And finally, an application fee of approximately typically $50 to $150 per application. All right, next, please. So one thing you'll want to think about when you're choosing your universities is, how does your academic profile compare to other applicants? How do universities measure you up as a potential colleague or student? So think about your grades, your UK qualifications, any test scores with US admission test scores, research, such as a dissertation as part of your undergraduate degree, work experience, any work that you've done, but for some programs that might be a bit more important, or a bit more valued than others. So for example, for an MBA, this is quite important, but for other programs, work experience might not be nearly as important as your academic experience. And then something that can just be called the it factor. So anything that makes you stand out to determine where you will likely be accepted or competitive for funding. So as an international student, maybe you had a really unique undergraduate program and can make a strong case as to why you and how you would bring something unique to the university and that program. and it may be also an interesting mix of ideas and people on the program, things like that, things that will make you appealing for admittance to their university. All right, next, please. So, quick notes on admissions tests. So this is a method of evaluating students, how they think and how they can perform academically. And this is generally due to a lack of a national curriculum, because most universities can kind of run their academics how they would like. So this is a way to kind of have a level playing field when measuring applicants against each other. So the very common one would be the GRE, which stands for the Graduate Record Exam, and it measures your verbal reasoning, quantitative reasoning, critical thinking, and analytical writing skills. So this would be something that would commonly be asked for social sciences, or even just hard sciences as well. And then yeah, so most master's programs, if they require an admissions test, it's the GRE. And then there's the GMAT, which is an MBA, which is for MBA programs and business programs. And then a few that I will mention, but are rather specific and are definitely applied to this very American system, is for law and for medicine. So if you're interested in a Juris Doctorate program, a JD program, you would be required to take the LSAT. But keep in mind, if you want to do an LLM law program, which is not directly an American law degree, it's more the study of law as a theory, then they instead might require a first degree in law. And then the MCAT is for MD programs and admission to medical school. And so with those last two, just remember that law and medicine can only be studied at the postgraduate level in the US. So yeah, those are kind of different situations. So you would probably commonly come across the GRE or the GMAT. And just the style of this test can be quite different to what you might be used to in the UK. So they're multiple choice, but with a very strict time limit. And don't think because it's multiple choice that it's easy. It's just very different. It functions. It asks you to think in different ways. So you would definitely want to prepare for these standardized tests if you're planning to take one. And just, yeah, there are a lot of free prep materials online, but there's also a lot of options to buy study guides if you'd like. So how important is standardized testing at admissions decisions? The answer is just, it depends. Some universities may not require them at all. So if you were like me and really didn't want to have to take the GRE, you can look for programs that don't require it. There's definitely quite a few out there. But and for others, it might factor into their decision, your GRE or GMAT score, but they're more interested in your personal statement and your transcript. So it is rare. It does really depend. So it could well be that some programs will be more interested in your analytical writing and verbal reasoning scores than how you did on the quantitative reasoning section, for example. So it really just depends. And it also just depends on how much weight it's given during your research process. You can kind of look into that during your research process. So to ensure that you take the appropriate test and to confirm that you need to take an admissions test at all, consult the website of each university you plan to apply to and pay close attention to the university's application deadline, and you'll need to plan your exam schedule accordingly. So we recommend that you register early for exams because this leaves the option to retake the exam if necessary. And as I mentioned, do properly prepare for the exam. And just to reiterate, check to make sure you need it at all. All right. Next, please. So the personal statement, this is a very important part of your application. It's not like your UCAS personal statement. Rather, it really is an opportunity to showcase what you can bring to a university and a department. So it's not an in-depth research proposal. Some unis may ask for separate research statements and outlines in your research interest and future plans. But some unis may ask for an essay instead of a statement. Others may ask you to address something specific. So just check the requirements carefully. And the statement really helps reveal an individual's character, motivation, future goals, interests in that particular university, program, department, in field. So definitely pay close attention to the personal statement and spend a good deal of time thinking about it and working on it. So writing your personal statement, since there's usually no set structure for writing a personal statement, you do have the opportunity to be creative and make yourself stand out. So some students choose to start with an anecdote describing how they became interested in their field of study. Others might use a central theme to link and describe their experiences and future plans for their studies and career. So there's a lot of different ways that you can approach a personal statement, as it is a bit creative in that sense. But just remember, don't be modest. It's time to sell yourself as an applicant. And if you want more tips on writing the personal statement, we have those on our website, including examples of some very successful personal statements. All right, next. And then finally, the letters of recommendation. So you'll always be required to gather some letters of recommendation, typically 2 to 3. And it's good to ask a variety of people who know you well. So as I mentioned, there might be some loose guidelines, like you need one from an academic referee. If you have multiple academic referees to choose from, you'll want to choose someone who knows you well, both in and out of the classroom, and definitely choose referees who will complement your application package. And so you get a good balance of classroom, professional, research, extracurricular, so that those reading your application can get a general idea of who you are. Details. And you can tell them the reasons you want to do a postgraduate degree in the US or in that chosen field, and your interest in the particular university selected. And that can also help them supplement when they're writing your letter of reference. So, and definitely make sure that you're see the letter before it gets sent off to the university to maintain the credibility of it. And you can direct referees to mention certain things, such as their abilities to succeed at postgraduate level, observations about your performance, ability to positively contribute, leadership and passion for your subject of choice, those kinds of things if they need a bit more guidance. And above all, encourage referees to avoid being restrained or too modest. American referees tend to write in a very enthusiastic, positive, descriptive language to discuss applicants both in and out of the classroom. So you want to keep in mind that that's what will probably be written about in the style, and the style that will be written that will be used for your American counterparts in their applications. So keep that in mind when you're comparing your UK referees to write their letters. All right, and now on to some ways that we can help with this whole process. So next, if you haven't already visited our website for advice or guidance, we definitely encourage that. Also events, under the Education USA Advice tab, you can find information about postgraduate study in the US with details on choosing, funding, and applying. And if you want more info on the Fulbright awards and each award category that's available, that is available under the Our Programs section on our website. Next, please. You can always feel free to email us at advising@fulbright.org.uk if you have specific questions that pertain to your situation, or you want to dive in a bit deeper onto something that we couldn't cover super in depth in this webinar. So please feel free to reach out with any questions at any time to that email address. And then finally, events about studying in the US online and in person. So we host a variety of events throughout the year, virtually and also sometimes in person. So you can always find out those through our website. And if you have any questions about them, feel free to email us at theadvising at fulbright.org.uk.